This is episode 54, right? This is a new guy in here. Hello, this is Tristan, a new guy. And, pero let me tell you. Let's start, pero let me tell you. Salsa, salsa es caliente. La miel de mi fuente goza y baila mi
gente. I'm ready as I'll ever be.
Aww.
Mira, esto es... ¿Cómo se llama esto?
It's a tambourine. I don't know how it's called in Spanish.
A tambourine.
Tambourine. What?
Are we on?
Yes, we are.
Well, everyone, welcome to episode 54.
Yes, you just heard the musical stylings of Darien Jesus.
And, okay, not for nothing, but wasn't that intro cute?
I'm going to say not just because he's your son and one of my favorite little kids, but yes, it was.
I'm not biased.
At all.
That's like when he was born, I'd be like, mira, if the kid is ugly, you could say he's ugly.
Yeah, he wasn't, thank God. I didn't have to lie to you.
No, pero es like alguno chiquito. And, you know, it's funny because people get very offended of like, oh my God, don't call my baby ugly. It's like, your baby is going to turn out to be cute.
Oh, I tell my sister all the time, Aiden, my middle nephew, was not cute when he was little.
Yeah, you don't want to peak out 0.
Yeah, exactly. He's adorable now.
Yeah, you don't want to peak that young. So how's everybody been?
I'm exhausted.
Yeah? Why are you exhausted?
Chico, because you and I haven't stopped for like almost 2 weeks.
I know.
The film festivals and Calle Ocho and
I feel that the Miami Film Festival, and thank you so much for inviting us, was so like, we were so enveloped in it. Like, from the red carpets to all the movies to the parties. It was like, oh my God, we're like totally like complaining. We sound like...
I know. First world problems.
Yeah, first world problems. We sound like Nikki and... ¿Cómo se llama?
And Paris?
Paris and Nicole Richie on The Surreal Life.
Miami Film Festival's hot.
I never saw a single episode of that garbage.
You never saw even like the first
episode?
episode?
I didn't.
No.
I've always thought that the Hilton sisters are the most toxic and disgusting
Nikki
duo
no
ever.
Tanto. Comparatively
speaking. But you know what, though? I always... Whenever I get mad or whenever I start to think crap about the Kardashians, as much as I...
Right. You start thinking about Kylie?
No, as much as I don't like the Kardashians, I always think, well, it could be worse. It could be the Hiltons.
We could have gotten the Hiltons.
We could have had the Hiltons. So,
that's very true.
Anyway, so before we talk about anything else, so this week was the end of The Bachelor.
Sure.
So what happened was... I've never seen The Bachelor. I don't care to see The Bachelor. Okay. I don't understand why people see The Bachelor. Right. I don't know anything about The Bachelor. But because I watched The View...
Say The Bachelor once more.
The Bachelor. Okay. But because I watched The View, I know that there was
corporate synergy.
That there was this whole thing about Colton, the Bachelor, who he jumped a fence and went after the girl he loved. And
why was she on the other side of the fence?
Because he had dumped her already.
It happens.
And the 2 girls he had left, you know, he had to pick one of them, right? And he didn't pick any of them, so he picked her.
Even though he let her go?
Yes, even though he had let her go. And I'm like, I don't understand
that sounds like the most
how anybody can watch this show and believe it's real. Now, if you want to watch it for shits and giggles, kind of like how I watched I Love New York some years back on VH1, right. You know, if you want to watch it for shits and giggles, go knock yourself out. But I don't understand, especially all the women that watch this show thinking that it's true love. And then I know that the twist in this season was that
he was a virgin.
He was a virgin, and then they're always given the fantasy suites.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, towards like the end when I guess he has a certain amount left.
Right, once he's spent 2.5 weeks with everyone who's in love with him.
Right, they give them the fantasy suite so they could spend a night, and
Is that like the Miami Princess?
Yes, like the Miami Princess Hotel. They have like a champagne jacuzzi and all
got
that.
It.
So
mirrors on the ceiling.
Exactamente. Right. So I think he didn't use the fantasy suites because he's a virgin. So I don't understand. But obviously,
do you think he played some tiddlywinks?
Whoops now.
Thank you
Sorry, I can't go.
Thank you. Okay.
Whoops now. And here I am reading something about whooping cough. on my, I just, you know what? If somebody out there, one of our listeners, understands The Bachelor or The Bachelorette,
or if one of the bachelors or bachelorettes is listening and wants to explain,
and you find the appeal of the show, let us know. Write us, because I certainly, I have an open mind, and as I've said before, there are a lot of things that I don't subscribe to that I'm not a fan of, but I could be like, okay, I kind of see the appeal, though it's not my shtick.
Right. And God knows we have our own guilty pleasures.
And the fact that I find that show is overtly racist.
Is it?
Okay, let's talk about the diversity of The Bachelor.
It's just sluts, right?
No, but even in The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, they had one black bachelorette, and they advertised that like it was a Super Bowl commercial, And it's like you would think that after having 5,000 seasons of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, there would be some more more diverse. No, they've had one black bachelorette, and they had one Hispanic bachelor who was blonde with blue eyes.
Oh, that Juan Pablo, right?
Yeah. So I mean, where's the diversity in this show? I mean, you want to talk about a show?
True.
I mean, come on. But I don't know. I you know what? To quote our cousins, our good old friends,
Mamas and Merlot,
I'm going to call that white nonsense. But again, if somebody's out there and wants to prove me wrong or wants to enlighten us on The Bachelor, go right ahead.
All right. We're working to coordinate, listeners, another episode with the Mamas. But this time I refuse to not have all three of them.
I know, right?
We have to have all three Mamas this time.
So we're going to need more wine. Anyway,
not a problem.
Speaking of white nonsense, so one of the biggest controversies, this was a good week for Jessie Smollett, but a bad week for Aunt Becky.
Well, she still has the good hair.
She'll always have the good hair.
Right, Becky with the good hair.
But yeah, Jessie Smollett is probably like, yeah, bitches.
Thank God.
Thank God. Something else. So, as you guys have probably know, and this is going to be, I guess, our marquee, I like that, our marquee topic of conversation. There was the largest college shakedown of, in terms of fraud admissions,
right.
in the history of the United States. It happened this year, which the FBI is calling the Varsity Blues.
I love it.
I mean, I love whoever came up with that.
They should have totally had made the announcement while holding a pig.
You know that James Vanderbeek tweeted about that.
I don't want your life.
So pretty much what happened was they caught there was this whole sting operation.
How did this even get on somebody's radar?
Okay, well, I'm gonna explain that. Okay. So, I believe like a year and a half or 2 years ago, there was the athletic director, I forget of what school, that she...
Carlos Albizu.
I forget what school it was, that she got caught accepting bribes. So then she started working for the FBI as an informant.
Okay, got it.
And then that went up, that information went up to the guy who currently set up the current scheme that brought everybody down now. His name is Rick Singer. So Rick Singer has been an informant for the FBI since, I believe, December of 2018. So he's been already doing it for a few months. So to kind of encapsulate the issue here. So people were paying large amounts of money to have their children be admitted into some of the most elite schools in the country. And among those people is our dear Lori Loughlin, who I love from Full House, Aunt Becky, and Felicity Huffman.
Two of the most innocuous human beings ever. Right. Like, what controversy would they ever have, right?
There were also, I believe, 30 to 35 additional parents who were charged.
People, isn't it?
Yeah, 30 to 35 additional parents who were charged. Obviously, they're the two biggest names, right, as well as a slew of admissions personnel, coaches,
because this isn't just
proctors,
right,
proctors for SAT exams, a whole slew of other people. So basically, what they were doing was, through this man, Rick Snyder, they were...
I thought you were going to say Rick Case.
Rick Case Honda.
Yeah.
They were paying this man whatever amount of money to get their kids in schools. And some of the ways that they would do it is, for example, in the case of Lori Loughlin or Becky, her daughter didn't have the grades to get, I believe it was to USC.
Yeah, USC.
And they got her in through the athletics program for crew, for rowing. Yeah. And the girl had never rowed. So from what I understand, they like superimposed her on a like actual like stock crew picture.
Basically, it's like when TV Guide put Oprah's head on Anne Margaret's body.
To get her in, and she got in through the athletics department. So obviously, like the head of athletics or the coach was paid off handsomely to get her in. In the case of Felicity Huffman, from what I heard, from what I read, the allegations are that they paid a proctor. They paid this man to have her take the SAT at an off-site location where it was easier for them to manipulate the setting and have a proctor
who would either coach or give the answers.
To, and
or give
therefore enhancing her SAT score and getting her into the college. So this kind of...
I think it's interesting that they only charged Felicity Huffman and not William H. Macy.
I know, right? I was thinking that as well.
But in the case of Lori Loughlin, it's her and her husband.
And her husband, right? And William H. Macy is in a lot of the evidence.
Yeah, that's why it's weird.
So it's interesting. They probably don't have any, because I know with Lori Loughlin, they have
didn't she like?
They recorded her.
Well,
they tapped her.
An email
they tapped her. So maybe they have evidence, but not enough to charge him. But anyway, so this.
Did you hear how much? I hate to keep interrupting you, but did you hear how much they set her bail at?
Becky's?
Yeah.
How much?
$1 million.
Yeah, that's surprising.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's
for somebody
surprising.
who starred in a sitcom on TGIF.
No, but that's surprising because she's not a flight risk.
No, but she's filming in Vancouver.
Yeah, but the problem is that they're going to make an example out of this. Yeah. So anyway, back to what I was saying. So this uncovered this whole scheme that it has been going on of parents and people that have money and influence about getting their kids into schools, into elite schools, and having them obviously bypass the more traditional route of application.
Well, the actual rigor of applying.
Right. So this opens a conversation not only so much in terms of the fraud, because this is fraud, but this also opens up the greater conversation in terms of... So this obviously opens up the conversation in terms of money and privilege and white nonsense. Because, I mean, let's be honest.
I hate the phrase white privilege, but this is the epitome
of white privilege. So, you know, it's harder and harder and harder to get into college these days. Schools have become extremely selective. And just I feel that the entire college system is rigged. And it's...
All of it, you think?
All of it. Because it's a circle. It's a cycle. You know, obviously you have safeguards like affirmative action and diversity numbers that colleges have in order to quote unquote make sure they're diverse. But think about the totality of a college admissions, right? If you're gonna take the SAT, you're gonna get the best SAT prep you have. If you're struggling with your grades, you're going to get a tutor.
Right.
There's people who write college entrance exams. I mean, that's totally legal. There's nothing fraudulent about that. From that to people who are legacy, to people that donate money to have buildings and hallways. What is the common denominator of all that? It's money.
Okay. I was going to say, like, you know, very expensive little sandwiches at parties, but
no, because I mean seriously, if you come to think about it, if you are a working class family, even like if your kid is brilliant, you're probably... I didn't take an SAT prep course. The SAT prep course that I took was
at school.
It was at school. Actually, you know what it was? I went to the public library and I checked out an SAT prep book. Because
I didn't even do that.
My parents couldn't buy an SAT, pay, you know,
and they're expensive.
They're super expensive.
Just the book to take it by yourself.
They're generally over $1,000. My parents didn't have the money to do that. So if you're working class, you know, and let's say you have a kid that has potential, you probably don't have the money to pay an SAT prep course. And, you know, and that's something that even if you're smart, you will benefit from.
Right.
You probably don't have the money to, you know, get tutors if you're falling behind on certain subjects. You probably don't have the money. You certainly don't have the money to have somebody do college essays for you,
right?
You know, and so on. Let alone do you have the money to pay a building to have a building on your name? Yeah. But what I'm saying is that this goes into this whole entire circular, issue that it's rigged. It's rigged, and it favors people that are wealthy, that are well connected, and usually are white.
I see where you're coming from, but I mean, as somebody who went to college, went to university, and I got there through my own merits, and I mean, I got a scholarship, so it's not like, you know what I mean? I can't sit here and say, yes, it's rigged, because I didn't experience it. But I don't know. I just think I think it might also just be one of those things where obviously everything you're saying is true, but I think there's also just things that get blown up in the media and garner more attention, and it reinforces these arguments, which are valid, but I don't think tell the whole story.
Well, I don't think they tell the whole story insofar that they're kids who are not privileged in any way, shape, or form and still get into elite schools, right?
Right.
But it's harder for them.
Well, absolutely.
And it shouldn't be. That's the argument.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree.
So the argument is that the system is unfairly balanced. It's not balanced.
Well, but who said life is fair?
Well, okay, right. But we're talking about education here. We're talking about education
but it's
here.
a higher education that nobody guarantees, because really they only guarantee you up until
right.
high school.
Nobody guarantees, but you don't. Higher education on the forefront should not be something that is available to people that are elite, because again, legacy, right? Whose legacy at Harvard? Right? If your parents went to Harvard, your parents probably did well,
right,
or they were connected. And if they went to Harvard, they probably are doing well now, and hence can't afford, to get you a tutor. Another thing. These elite schools, or not only elite schools, just any good school.
It's hard to get into a state school.
Any good school. Let's talk about extracurricular activities. And it's not anymore like, I played baseball for 10 years. It's like, okay, where did you intern at in high school?
In high school, yeah.
Have you been a fellow? Have you, have you been in lacrosse, in crew? I mean, who in Miami, in any working class high school in the suburbs, does any of those sports? Like,
that's why you go to Miami-Dade.
Well, but
I'm teasing.
Right, but that's and another thing. I wanna bring.
Also, you were saying the name of that school wrong, by the way.
What?
It's Harvard.
Okay, and Jesse. You know what? They didn't even accept Jessie Spano.
They didn't accept Jessie Spano, and I mean, clearly she's smart. So that's it. We're gonna end there. We're gonna end the topic right here.
They accepted Zach
because he's Aryan looking.
You know what? You said it, at me. But actually, let me throw this little tidbit at you.
I love tidbits.
So one of the things that I've read in the last couple of days since this blew up is the increasing, just unsustainable competition that colleges have had.
It's crazy.
It's crazy to get into college now.
Hell, it's crazy to get into preschools nowadays.
Yes, but let's talk about our two schools. I went to Florida International University. You went to the University of Miami. Okay? I think you and I were not too different in terms of our grade point averages. We were both in the AP honors program. We did very well in school. Yeah. I forget my exact GPA, but for argument's sake, I think you and I were well within the top 7% of the school.
Okay, I'll take it.
Okay, so well within. I think. I want to say that my unweighted GPA was like a 3.5, which is like an A. So yours was probably somewhere there, because you and I always did the same, except that one time that I got an A.
I'm still not over it.
I got an A in the test for Beowulf after not reading the book, and you did not get an A.
I got a B, and I read like half the book. I'm still not over it. Gonna turn 40 this year. That was when we were 18. Still not over it.
Yep. So anyway, but aside from that, so nowadays, and you got into UM and you got a scholarship. I got into FIU and got a scholarship as well. Nowadays, FIU, as of 2018, FIU admits only 41.9% of its applicants. Their current average unweighted GPA for FIU is a 3.7.
So we would have gotten in.
An A. The average SAT score for FIU is... I can't find the info here on the SAT score. But the thing with SAT scores is that SAT scores changed since we took them, so it's not the number now, like 1140.
It's not a 1600?
It's not the same as ours, because now there's another an 1139. Okay. But the 1139 now, it's not averaged the same way as when we took the SAT. That's at FIU. So
I'll take your word for it.
At the University of Miami,
I don't remember what my SAT score was.
As of 2018, it was 32.1.
Wow.
Okay. The average GPA was a 3.8.
Okay.
And the average SAT was a 1240. Neither of us would get into our respective colleges right now.
Nope. And that was 20 years ago.
Or we would be in a waiting list or something or whatever.
Yeah.
And we were at the top of our class.
Wow.
We were at the top of our class with a bunch of extracurricular activities because I was president of a club. So were you. I was a Silver Knight nominee. I was editor-in-chief of the yearbook. I did community service. I had like 500 hours of community service.
Yeah.
I set up the community.
We were well-rounded as high school.
I mean, we had a good resume when we graduated high school. We just didn't go through. We would not get into our respective colleges right now. How about them apples?
Wow.
Is that fair? Because it's not like, University of Miami or FIU or Harvard. True. They're good schools.
But, right. But we're not talking Duke.
FIU is a state school. UM is private, but UM is a great school, so FIU is a good school too. It's not Harvard. We wouldn't be able to get in.
So what the hell is it for Harvard? Shit.
So that is the argument. If a state school is so hard to get into, and then, like, for example, FIU brags. I mean, these are bragging rights. You could go to their website and find it. How they reject so many numbers of valedictorians.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because schools want to be more selective. Because when they're selective, their prestige goes up. True. So when their prestige goes up, they could charge more.
Okay.
It's a circle. It's a cycle.
Vicious cycle.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
So then, if you're, Carlitos over here, who you do well, you're not necessarily the...
Well, but hell, even the valedictorians are getting rejected.
Right. So if you're Carlito over here, maybe you have like a high B average.
Right.
You don't have to have a solid A average. Maybe you have a high B or maybe a low A. You do well and all that stuff. You can't even get into FIU.
Now, is that straight from high school into FIU? Or
yes.
Is that... the numbers might be a little different for those who go to community college first.
Yeah, but...
Okay, no, I'm just asking
but
for,
community college,
the sake of...
The community college is going to take everybody. I didn't count community college because a community college is going to... it's a community college. It's going to take anybody with a pulse. Right. And that's nothing against community colleges whatsoever. Miami-Dade Community College here in South Florida...
It's not even community college anymore. It's Miami-Dade College.
Miami-Dade College is a great college. When it was a community college, it was a great community college. Yeah. It's nothing against community college. I'm talking about the regular... Universities and colleges. It's terrible. So that's why I say that it's, when you go back to who is the one getting in the top of this, people with money, people that have influence, people that are, can afford to do a $400,000 donation to a school.
$500,000 for Becky. Full House reruns have been very good to them.
Yes, and Fuller House.
And Massimo. Her husband is Massimo. People forget this.
Yeah. No, and she has Hallmark movies.
Well, she's on a Hallmark series now, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wonder that... actually, what I was going to say was that I read earlier today, because I kept seeing her face. And every time I was online that I would see is they would put her face. And I would wonder why, because I do think Felicity Huffman is the bigger star.
But the bigger name... recognition-wise is Lori Loughlin.
No, what I read was it's because of her image.
Well, but that's what I meant. Like, everybody knows Aunt Becky.
Yeah, because of her clean-cut, squeaky image.
Right.
From everything she's ever done. So it's more of like
if Bob Saget was, caught for murder.
Yeah, but we know Bob Saget has a dirty side to him.
Yeah, but he's still Danny.
So, this is something that we actually talked about in our very first episode. Remember I went off on income disparity and...
Oh, yeah.
And again, this is a topic that is very, very near and dear to me because, you and I have talked about this, not on air, but we've talked about it among our friends.
We actually talk off air?
We do. I remember when I was in high school, my parents could not afford a tutor. My parents, I was in charge of everything in terms of my school. When I needed to do a science project, I would tell my mom, hey, I need to go to the library, the public library, and I need, and I would look up science experiments. When I needed to buy my triboard, Mom, you need to take me to Cinco
We didn't have the internet back then, kids, so we had to go to the library.
And buy me the triboard. My mom wouldn't ask any questions. That was all me self-taught. Why? Because I knew that my parents didn't have the money to get a tutor or get somebody to help me. My parents didn't speak English, so they couldn't even help me there. Right. So
what was the alternative?
I failed. I remember that when I just couldn't figure something out, I would call Dial Teacher.
Aww.
From Channel 17, Dial Teacher.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and all of our friends, we've all talked about how all of our friends have had similar experiences, right? Because that's what you had to do. Now, all these kids, they're growing up in these privileged households where they have anything that they want. Their parents have money and influence. Of course, they're going to get into an elite school. But you and I have talked about this before. Oye, qué casualidad that all these actors and all these people from Hollywood, they're all so smart that they could get into Harvard and Yale. What a coincidence, right? That they're so smart. Or all these rich, influential people, all their kids get into top schools. It's wow. It's what a coincidence.
You know what the moral of the story is?
What?
If you, your husband, and your twins live in the attic of a house, you too can save enough money to spend $500,000 to send your child to school.
Especially if you're living in San Francisco.
Exactly.
But I mean, and I know from personal reasons of having people in my life at one point or another close to me that were in this realm of elite schools and that came from
that prep school
money and influence and being well connected. It's
stop bragging about your time with the Kennedys. God.
it's like a club, it's like a club. It's I bet you none of the people that your family hung out with growing up, limpiaban casa or were mechanics and all that, but that's normal to them because they
just don't know anything else.
That is their circle, and that's the biggest problem with white privilege is that they don't see that it's white privilege, but or white nonsense as our friends
at Mama's and Merlot. Well, you know who would absolutely agree with us on every single topic we've just discussed, specifically white privilege and white nonsense. This week's guest.
Oh yes.
Yes, we have the privilege of having author Daniel Jose Older.
And not the white privilege.
Not the white privilege. The brown privilege? Latino privilege? Hispanic? Latinx?
Yeah, the
general people privilege?
Non-white privilege.
The non-white privilege. It would not check the box on the census. Of chatting with him. He's an author, written some supernatural type books. He's got a book coming out in November, magical realism, ties into the Cuban Revolution. He's half Cuban. His mom is Cuban. And you said it perfectly after once we finished speaking with him. You were like, he is the definition of woke.
Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head.
Well, that, and if you think I just went a rant now about the education system and white privilege, that man threw a wrench at the literary world and it's white nonsense. I mean, they changed the trophy because of him, but you'll hear it in the interview.
So here comes our interview with Daniel Jose. Welcome back, listeners. As we promised, we're here with Daniel Jose Older, author, fantasy writer, really, and he's also working on something that's, I guess, still in the realm of fantasy. It's magical realism, but a little less about the supernatural and fantasy. I think coming up in the next couple months. But thank you so much for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Welcome on to Pero Let Me Tell You.
Yes, sir. Hey.
So first and foremost, just because we gotta represent, Daniel's also a fellow Cuban American. So just a lo cubano ahí, it's the way it is. So Daniel, I mean, your debut album, your debut novel came out in 2015, which was, if I remember correctly, Half Resurrection Blues, which is part of the Bone Street Rumba novel series.
Yep.
And I gotta say, I I didn't read the book. I listened to it on Audible, so I feel like I've already been talking to you for a bit.
Oh, that is my voice. Yep.
Oh no! The minute that we hit you up on Skype, I was like, that voice sounds very, very, very familiar, very familiar. But yes. What I think many people might not know is that you were up until 2014. You were an EMT. How do you make that transition?
A paramedic, actually.
A paramedic. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah,
how do you make that transition from paramedic to?
Nobody even knows the difference, so it's okay. It's terrible. But sorry. Go ahead with your question.
No. How did you make that transition? Is it something that you had always wanted to be a writer, and you said, you know what, to hell with it, hasta aquí llegué, and I'm making that transition, or was it more gradual?
It was definitely gradual. It was a process. Actually, for a lot of that period, I was really focused more on music. So I was composing, and I put a band together, and I was doing kind of like different gigs, writing music for choreographers and filmmakers and puppeteers, and like lots of people who could not pay me very well. And so I was like, you know what? Because I had to, pay the musicians to perform on the track and everything else. And I was like, this is literally never going to get me off the ambulance, which was a job I loved. But I also knew like it wasn't what I wanted to do for my whole life. Because even though I didn't know exactly what the medium was going to be, I always knew I wanted to tell stories. I didn't know if it was going to be music, film, or what. I suspected writing, but I wasn't sure. And then it was really kind of out of that process that I was like, it was blogging kind of. And because I would get home from a ridiculous night on the ambulance, and I would just blog about it, and it would take me like 20 minutes. I'd just like write up some stuff, and then people were like, "This is great, man," and I was like, "This is so easy." And then I was like, "If I just made some shit up, this would be fiction." And then I was like, "If I keep doing that would be a novel." And that really like demystified the process for me. And it's funny that you read or that you listened to Half Resurrection Blues first, because if you go to my blog and you read some of those old entries from my ambulance years, that's the same voice of Carlos. Like very clearly, like you can tell that I was just like, this is what it's like to be me, but now there's dead people around. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very clear transition from one to the next.
But I think working on the ambulance, you were around a couple of half-dead people a lot, I'm sure.
I was definitely, exactly. And that's the other piece is like, it's definitely the death, but it's also like the bureaucracy of life and death, which is what the Council of the Dead really represents. And dealing with like, just the paperwork and the business end and the politics of being, a New York City paramedic, which all is part of the job, unfortunately, all that bullshit. And I was like, man, this can't be life. This can't even be death. This is crazy.
Now, you said that you were blogging and writing about your experiences. Prior to this, did you ever think that you had the ability of being a good writer? Was writing ever a medium that maybe not even as a profession, just like in high school, as an outlet you used?
I've always loved writing. I've definitely always loved writing, and at different times in my life I did flirt with the idea of it. Like towards the end of high school and in college, I was definitely like, I want to write, but I also want to experience the world and understand, like write from a point of view of experience and not just from like things I read in books, which is a large part why I became a paramedic. It's a great job. It helped me pay the rent, but it also like put me out in the world in the middle of other people's crises in a way that was invaluable to my writing life. And also I want to say, like, not just as a witness, but as an active participant. And I think sometimes I knew that going in, like I didn't just want a job that would have me looking at things and recording them, but really involved and invested in them in a different way. Because I think as artists and writers, we can get trapped in this idea that we're like outside the world taking notes. And that's never true. But that's a myth that we kind of play into sometimes. And I've also been an organizer for most of my life. And that's always a really important aspect of what I do. So it was kind of, being a paramedic was kind of a great combination of like being, in the midst of people's problems and also trying to be a part of helping them.
So you were you've also worked in terms of being a community organizer.
Yeah, doing a lot of work around gender violence and race and intersectionality. Back before intersectionality was like the cool hashtag on Twitter, we were, doing a lot of work around getting those different worlds in the same room together, because that was pretty hard to do, 10, 15 years ago. Like, folks just didn't want to have those conversations across the board. For the most part, it was hard to really get into the nitty gritty of like gender and race in the nonprofit industry and stuff like that. So that was a lot of the work that we were involved with.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things I thought of as I was listening to you read your novel is, the protagonist is not dead, not alive. He straddles the two worlds, and immediately, the fact that he's Puerto Rican, I think at one point you even say something to the effect of like, well, they told me I'm Puerto Rican. It wasn't even like he remembers his life, but it's always. Do you find, was it on purpose? Just you're always straddling, like, am I American? Am I Hispanic? Am I this? Am I that?
Right.
Was that part of it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's absolutely the central kind of like metaphor and poetry behind that whole series, or particularly Carlos's struggle. Because as the series moves on, it breaks into other characters and their arcs and their relationships to the kind of larger conflict. But Carlos himself, being an in-betweener, is very much about what it means to be, it's funny because when I was first grappling with a lot of that stuff, I thought it was because I'm of mixed heritage, because my mom is Cuban and my dad is Jewish, and white Jewish, and that's complicated, you know what I mean? And then as I started talking to other Latinos, it was like, wow, a lot of us have similar conversations, even people who have both parents who are Latino. There's a lot of kind of in between space that folks inhabit.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time.
I think particularly like brown folks, like in this country, and I think that's an important conversation to have, and it was one that I wanted to have on a fictional plane, without it being like a direct metaphor. You know what I mean? It's more about the emotional metaphor than the like the dead people equal this side of things and the live people are this side. Like, it's not that simple. Nothing is that simple, right? But it is about having access to many spaces and also not feeling at home in many spaces, but having to then find home wherever you go. And that's kind of the conflict.
That's perfectly said, because that's something that here on the podcast in previous episodes, we've talked about extensively, how when, in our case, being Cuban American, and we're kind of light skinned, we kind of straddle two different worlds, and obviously we're American because we were either born or raised here, but at the same time our Cuban heritage runs strong. So what you said sums it up perfectly. Like, you really don't feel exactly at home in either, and where you feel comfortable, you kind of have to create that space many times where you feel 100% comfortable.
And that's like,
something that really related to us.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
that's something in your writing that really struck us.
Good, that's great. I'm glad, because that's really what it's about at so many levels. And Carlos has these moments throughout the series where he's like, what is home? And every once in a while, something will strike him as like being home. And for him, usually it's seeing like the dead and the living interact on some level, because those are the two parts of him that are literally at war at different times. And, I think for us, it's a question of like, what does that mean? And it's been different spaces, that accept us in different ways, But I think also part of this conversation is like also recognizing like that there's a tremendous power to that. And that sometimes that power is very toxic too. Like we inhabit a certain place of both oppression and privilege. And so that's also been an important part of like, and there's parts where Carlos gets checked on that. Like, he also has privilege. And, I think as non-Black Latinos, we have to recognize that and deal with it very upfront. And also the fact that we're not white, but there's all these like very complex overlapping layers of power and privilege that are involved in who we are.
It's complicated.
It is. It surely is. And like what makes it more complicated is the language of it is still very much, is always in flux. Up until a certain point in American history, fairly recently, Latino was considered like a race on the census, in different ways. And like, what did that mean? And what did that really mean? And so many of the ways we're defined are because of power plays, by people who aren't us, by white folks. And different just logistical maneuvering, and strategizing that has nothing to do with culture or humanity or identity. But we end up having to take on those fights and figure out what that means for us and who we are. And that's another form of oppression right there.
So you shifted the conversation to an area I was actually very excited to talk about, because in doing research for this interview, and knowing, getting to know a little bit about you, the person, and obviously the writer, but the person and what you've done since you've arrived in this, world in terms of writing. I feel that you've kind of thrown a wrench at the system, because you've called out things that many either other people didn't call out or just told them for what they were. And one of the things that I found really interesting was how you said that, I think it was in an interview that you gave a couple of years ago, how you stated that a lot of times, or all the time, nonfiction is extremely political. That how even like whether it's Harry Potter or the Hunger Games.
Okay. He's literally just looking at me and snapping his fingers. I don't know what
would be extremely political. So talk to us a little bit about how, a work of fiction that maybe picking it up, somebody doesn't necessarily think it's a piece of work that it includes politics, but how is that political?
Right. Well, for me, like the realm of politics is most easily seen when we start to think about context and world building. If we're going to go deep with it, like that's where it comes out clearest, right? So context means like what gets left in and what gets left out, right? Like whose stories we decide to tell, whose visions and histories matter, and whose don't. So what fantasy fiction has been telling us for basically since its inception in like its Western literature format, has been that our lives as people of color don't matter and don't merit any kind of real attention beyond being sidekicks who are about to die for the benefit of the white hero or bad guys. And that's the message that's been very clearly given, and that's a political message. I think we are a little bit sort of subdued to the notion of like when it's the dominant hierarchical kind of like message that it's not even a message at all. That's how deeply invested in it we become, without even thinking about it. It's like subconscious, right? So like, take Lord of the Rings, like has an extremely white power narrative behind it. And I don't think that means it's a terrible book or that no one should read it. I think it means we should read it with a critical eye and understand it for what it is, which is the message that like Western civilization is the greatest civilization ever, and no other civilization is worth, it's like chancletas, right? So,
hey, chancletas have a purpose.
Even stories that are sort of like trying to be subversive to that, if they don't address it, they're playing into it still. So, I love Harry Potter. Harry Potter changed the world, and Harry Potter addresses a lot of interesting questions of inequality and resistance within its narrative, and I love it for that. And Harry Potter is still a white dude saving the world and marginalized brown people on the edges of the story. And I don't think retroactive diversity counts, So I think it's worth like having that conversation and having it both like in the streets, in the essays and that space, and then in the fictional space and that's where Shadow Shaper came from. Like that's the first book I really wrote is Shadow Shaper. And I wrote it because I loved Harry Potter, but I had turned away from fantasy for like almost a decade because as a kid, like I couldn't find myself in it. And then I came back to it and I was like, hey, Harry Potter, this is amazing. And I was like, it's still the same white dude saving the world. What's going on, people? And then it was the Hunger Games and it was a white woman saving the world. Although in the book, she's not really white, but whatever. It's like, it's very repetitive. And so as much as I love those series, and I do love them, I really wanted to explore like what if, not just the characters were brown and black folks, but the magic, the rhythms, the world building.
Right.
Like what if it felt holistic to us in a harmonious and in its entirety, and not just in like a pastiche, like throw a brown face on a white story kind of way.
Right.
Yeah. But that's a big part of something that I think you've done quite well with Half Resurrection, which is the world building. There were moments there where, again, the benefit of having a Hispanic read it, the pronunciations are great, so thank you for that. But there's certain little things and little phrases and touches where it's clear to me that it's, to your point, it's not just I took a protagonist whose name was John and I named him Carlos instead, and called it a day. Like, no, there's culture behind everything there. And further than that, your female protagonist is no damsel in distress. So, I mean, that in and of itself, to your point about, this person's just here to service a story. Like, she's not. I mean, she is in the way that all characters are, but,
Yeah, that's always been important to me. Most of my books have female protagonists as the main characters. And Sasha goes on to be a main point of view character in the third book, because she is that important to the overall narrative.
Don't ruin it for me. I need to hear it from your voice
as
we go on.
You'll see.
But on that point, you also currently have a YA series, the Dactyl Hill Squad, and that is unabashedly, it's right there on the cover. One of the covers I noticed, aside from the gigantic dinosaur, was it was a brown girl. Just right there on the cover, unapologetically. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Dactyl Hill Squad? Because I feel like I've kind of aged out of that one, so I didn't pick into it.
She is actually, she's Cuban too, as a matter of fact.
A Cuban and a dinosaur. What's not to love?
Exactly. I mean, we've all, I think, spent most of our lives wishing that we had books about Cuban girls riding on dinosaurs. So,
you've clearly read my wish list.
So actually, that's really interesting because it came from a moment when I was researching New York history for a rock opera project back when I was doing more music, and I got a grant from the Brooklyn Historical Society to go into their archives and just have fun and create a project based on something. So I was living in Crown Heights at the time, which used to be called Crow Hill, and that's what some of the elders in the neighborhood still call it. And I thought that was pretty amazing. So I looked up a little bit more history of that. It turns out that Crow Hill was one of the original communities, one of the first autonomous black communities in the country. And a lot of people of color fled there during a lot of the racial tension that was happening in Manhattan. And I thought that was really fascinating because there's so many parallels to today. Brooklyn at different times has been a safe space for people of color fleeing from different kinds of violence. And then gentrification happens and pushes folks out, and then there's a cycle again. So that was amazing. And while I was researching that, it led me to look at the Colored Orphan Asylum, which was an institution in Manhattan that was burnt down during the Civil War draft riots in 1863. And I was reading this book called In the Shadow of Slavery by Leslie Harris, which was about that period of time. And there was one paragraph in there that was about a family of, I think, 6 Cuban girls who were dropped off in this orphanage mysteriously and then whisked away again a couple months later. And basically they figured they were probably taken back to Cuba, and they thought they were kids from a plantation because their father was listed as the same and their mothers were all different. So that's all we know. It's this one little moment. And the only reason we know it is because a historian found that and decided it mattered. Again, context, right? And put it in her book. And even that is it's just all we know is a paragraph of information. And it just really struck me because you know what it's like, guys. As a Cuban, you're oh my God, we were there. That's such a moment, right? And it blew my mind because Jose Marti spent time in New York a little bit later than that. But generally, we just don't hear about Cubans in New York in the 18 anything. It's just not a thing. But we were there. I found a couple others, and that was fascinating. But that moment really struck me because of that, and just because the narrative itself just sounds like such a cool children's book story.
Yeah, no, I have to expect you to end it with
that's some children's book shit, And then I was what if they escaped? And instead of getting taken back to Cuba, what if they just got out into the streets of New York? And what if they knew how to ride on pterodactyls? And that's the question that's behind every great book, I think,
Also, pterodactyls would probably make the ultimate arroz con pollo.
Now, one can argue that you've become a bit of an activist, if you will. I guess what I'm curious about is, because this is something that always intrigues me of people that, have such a clear and outspoken voice when they're given a platform. Is this something that happened organically in terms of you started writing the books, obviously because of who you are and your experiences, organically, these were the type of books that you were going to write? Or as you did become a writer and you did now have this platform, you felt the need to speak up about certain things and the way that you saw them?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. And for me, this has always been built into who I am as a writer. There was never a question about that. I would say I was an activist before I was a writer, but I was a writer before I was an activist, because they're both true. There was periods in my life when I figured I would just be a writer, and then I became an activist, and then I became a writer again, and so it's an ongoing cycle. And then I found myself as an activist in the writer community, which I guess is the best of both worlds, right? But I knew that I needed to tell these stories, because that was the root of me going into this work, was I was working with kids in Bushwick, with a group of mostly Dominican and Puerto Rican kids in Bushwick, and they had Octavia Butler to read. They were reading Parable of the Sower. And that's a really important author to me because when I was in 7th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Middleton, gave me an Octavia Butler book sort of out of the blue. And I had never heard of her. And she's really one of the greatest fantasy science fiction writers of all time. And I always think, like, I was in 7th grade, you know, like I had no idea what I wanted to do in my life. I don't know how Mrs. Middleton knew that one day I would grow up and like need this book to look back at and be like, wow, like people of color do belong in fantasy. Because that's really what happened. Like I read the book when I was a kid and I was like, wow, this is so weird. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then like 15 years later, I was working with these kids in Bushwick and they had that book and I was like, oh my God, this is it, right? Because that was at that same moment when I had come back to Harry Potter and was kind of like, love it, but also this and thing. And then I was like, wow, and I read all of Octavia Butler, and she has such a complex approach to thinking about power and thinking about race and gender, and not in a obvious or dichotomous way, but just in a very, you know, very mushy and real and human way that fits into fiction beautifully. And it was just like this big, it was like, go, you can write this, you know, like this is permission to write that complex story that you wanted to tell. And so that's why in Shadow Shaper, the kids all go to Octavia Butler High School, which is a place I made up, but maybe will one day exist, you know. So to me, it's always been built in. And that was kind of always the core of the stories I wanted to tell. I knew I wanted to tell our stories and deal with things like white supremacy and internalized the shit that we do to each other. You know, that's ongoing themes throughout my work is power and privilege and also the humanity of that and what it does to us. And so it's always been there.
Well, now that you mentioned Octavia Butler and how I had mentioned earlier that you threw a wrench at the system, something that really kind of shocked me, but in a way I was like, you go, like, was, you know, how you kind of single-handedly called out the World Fantasy Award over their statue.
H.P. Lovecraft?
Right, on how you took that head on to bring awareness as to the history and trajectory.
Because they changed it.
And they changed it. So, I mean, I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that you probably received a lot of blowback and opposition for that. I mean, how was that whole experience?
It was amazing. I will say it wasn't, it was... The act itself, that single act, was a part of a much larger movement that had been going on for a while about taking it down. There had been other attempts, and I think those were part of the momentum that led to this one being the one that kind of really took it out. And one thing that's interesting to directly respond to the question is that there's a writer, Nnedi Okorafor, who had won the award a couple years prior to when the petition went out. And she had put up a blog post about really just saying like she felt a way about having this racist as an award and having his head in her house. And not even saying like, y'all need to take it down or nothing, just like, this is weird, you know, acknowledging the tension of that. And that was something that I mentioned in the, you know, in the petition, and she ended up getting a lot of hell for it. And I think that really speaks to just what it means to be a Black woman online, you know, in this day and age and have an opinion, because she caught a lot more of the death and rape threats than I did. And that's really, really messed up, you know, because at that point she was done talking about Lovecraft. Like she didn't have anything. She was like, I said what I had to say. That's it, you know. And for me, like, it's so weird because people did come at me quite a bit and occasionally still do. And they'd be like, why are you campaigning and why are you so determined and why are you doing all this hard work to like take down this hero? And I was like, yo, I literally spent 15 minutes uploading a petition. And then I tweeted it like once, and then
that's all it took.
Blew up. And I think that's hilarious. Like I went on later to write about it in the Guardian, but at that point, like it had already taken on its own momentum. So like, and I say that to say like humbly, like you know, I'm happy that I got to play a part in it and do my piece in this movement. And I think it's hilarious that people think that I walk around like hating Lovecraft all day and like writing people wrote entire, you know, repeatedly wrote blog posts about me and who was I and let me Google him and nobody's ever heard of him and he has no career and all this other ridiculous stuff. Like noted scholars, you know. So I thought it was hilarious and ridiculous. And I'm also very pleased that now it's a beautiful tree instead of a racist head.
Yeah, actually, you know what?
That's a T-shirt waiting to happen.
I would like to pick your brain on this, because nowadays, whether it's a racist head or a work that was done by somebody who was, racist or made racist comments, or even something like now that's going on with I know this is a little bit out of the realm of writing of R. Kelly, and his abuse allegations and Michael Jackson and all that. What is your take on the art and, the artist?
That's a tough question, man. I've been thinking so much about it. It's a great question, and I don't know if I have a direct answer because I just go in circles in my head. But I will say that almost I think more important than that answer, whatever I do or don't feel about it, is understanding the history of what I keep going back to in my head is that quote by Chinua Achebe, which I can't remember exactly. I gotta Google it.
All Things Fall Apart, great book.
What's that?
All Things Fall Apart, great book. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but he has a quote about lions telling the history of lambs or something, and what happens when the lion,
right.
Or maybe it's the hunter telling the history of the lion. It's a beautiful quote, and I'm going to bungle it if I try to do too much more. But it's basically the idea of the victor telling the story and
right.
getting to tell the story and then destroying the story by telling it to make themselves look good. And that's what I keep thinking about in this era of understanding just how deeply entwined entertainment and literature is with people who are abusive in one way or another. I think that's what's fascinating and tragic about this is understanding that truth, which actually we've always known, because none of this is new information. It's just being repeated at a much louder volume and decibel now.
Right.
And so we're understanding it differently because it's coming at us in a much more frequently and with much more urgency to it. But none of it's new. We've always understood these things to be true, that Hollywood is a very sexist and scary place full of sexual assault. That's not a new thing. And we've just kind of accepted it because we didn't think it could change.
Right.
And then as men, I think because we benefited from it on some level, on
right.
some really creepy level. And so, this is a time for unraveling all the stories that we kind of allowed ourselves to believe were true, even though we knew they weren't.
Right.
That there's equality in storytelling. There isn't. People who aren't men have been routinely kept out of the process by people who are men. And that's the story that I think we need to really look at hard and, on the one hand, look back and see how has that affected literature as a whole, cinema as a whole. How would it have been different if that hadn't been the case, if it hadn't been about. It's hard to let go of our heroes, and
right.
I struggle with that still, a lot with different things.
Yeah.
But I also think if that's the price we have to pay to create a world where women feel safe, then that's the price we have to pay to create a world where women feel safe.
Yeah, when you're saying, as you were saying this, this past weekend, Ish and I went to, here in Miami, the Miami Film Festival, and we saw a movie called This Changes Everything, which is a documentary regarding women in Hollywood, particularly women in the role of directors. And it goes with what you're saying. We knew this. It's not like we didn't know about whether it's the Hollywood casting couch or how Hollywood has degraded women and
just general discrimination.
Out. But to see it in these women talking about it and saying their own, what they went through, their own experience, puts a face to it that obviously gives it a different perspective because you're seeing it directly from the person. And it was, I remember when we saw this, again, not that we were shocked, oh my gosh, Hollywood is sexist,
exactly.
But it's oh my gosh, this is absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
So it's the times we live in, because
I also think there's a difference between what we engage in privately and what we publicly lift up. I may listen to what I listen to when I'm in my room quietly listening to my room. If it's someone who is a rapist, I'm not going to pay money for it.
Right.
But I'm not going to champion that work in the public space. I'm not going to use my platform to give that work any kind of play. And that's that. I don't think, with Lovecraft, for example, which is a sort of easier thing to grapple with, I think, because he's dead, first of all. And so he's not making any money off it.
True.
And second of all, because, I think his legacy is really clear, first of all. It's very established. And he's had a huge effect on fantasy literature, both for good and for bad. Fantasy literature is, as we've been discussing, a very racist place, and we're just starting to really break that down now by getting our voices out there on different levels, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of that is his legacy because he was so virulently, that word, why do I bother? He was so extremely violently racist, even by the standards of the day, which were already pretty freaking racist. So there's that, but then also I think it's never been like nobody should ever read Lovecraft. Like, I've never said that. That's what they accuse me of saying. Right. But what I've said is we shouldn't hold him up as like the pinnacle of our entire
what you should
genre.
strive to become, essentially.
There's a lot of space between saying this man shouldn't be the one and only fantasy writer who we have as an actual award, like that's based on their head, which is ugly.
Right.
And then saying like, no, never read him. Like, you won't catch me saying that because I've read him and I've enjoyed some of his work. I think his prose is terrible, but I think his imagination is fascinating and disgusting and sometimes really useful to us as writers. So we have room for nuance in this conversation.
Now, this begs the question, in terms of where we are today, whereas you could say there's been some progress made with writers as yourself, even like a movie like Black Panther, for example, that was such a hit, but obviously whether it's our current administration and now kind of this resurgence, at least publicly, of racism, because this is something again that we've talked about a lot on the podcast. People always talk now about like, well, racism is on the rise. I think racism has never gone away. It's just that people now are a lot more
have Twitter
public about it than they were before, unapologetic about it. Right. Where do you kind of see where we are now in terms of the progress made with what you stand for, being inclusive and diversity? Where do you kind of see we are today?
I think you just summarized it really well. I agree with what you said. We are in the middle of an explosion of the things that have been underlying, the threads of our country, the fabric of since it's been a republic. And since people have invaded this territory and taken over the land, like that's always been a part of it. That's the foundation of this country. And it has been disguised in different ways throughout the history too. But we've been lying about our past right up until Trump was elected. Like even Obama was saying things like, we're a nation of immigrants, based on freedom. And like none of that has ever been true. It's been much more complicated and bloody than that. And I think our failure to really deal with that bloody history is exactly why we are where we are at right now. So that, and I also think like the upsurge of movements like Black Lives Matter and different groups, the movement for Black Lives and just different groups that are fighting for freedom in different ways, in very outrageous and audacious ways. And I mean that in the best way. That was part of the change that we're living through now in terms of like literature too. Like when we were first starting this struggle a couple of years back, when I was working on Shadow Shaper and getting that out and different, elements and conversations that were happening online, back when organizations like We Need Diverse Books were just popping up as a hashtag, the thing that publishing industry people would tell us, and I'm sure this was the same in Hollywood and video games and everywhere else where there's an upsurge now. They were saying, these books don't sell, they'll never sell, that's why we don't do them. It's about the dollar. We're not racist, it's just that you people don't read.
Right. The numbers. Numbers don't lie.
Right. Like you really say that in the same sentence. Like you're proving how wrong you are in the same sentence. Okay, cool. But anyway, they were wrong. Like that's the bottom line. Like look at Black Panther. Look at Children of Blood and Bone, The Hate You Give, Hamilton, Luke Cage, like all of which broke all the expectations of them and exploded and sold millions of tickets and copies and everything else. That's a story that matters. And the fact that we were right all along matters. And the fact that there was racism behind the naysayers matters, and those people are still kind of making decisions and in charge of stuff in the industry, and they're actually reaping the benefits of us being right. Yeah. And that's an important part of this, and also the fact that literature is changing for the better because of this work. And I think that's a really exciting thing to be a part of and to witness. And then it's not just one, you know what I mean? Like that I can just like rattle off a whole bunch of stuff. Like, look, last year began with Black Panther and ended with Into the Spider-Verse, which was one of the best movies of all time, right? Like, incredible. And that's within that, those are both superhero movies with Black leads that show an incredible diversity of storytelling techniques and culture and different things. And that really goes to show like just how much there is out there and how much more is coming and what an amazing moment we're living in.
Absolutely. And speaking of how much more is coming, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your book coming out in November, Book of Lost Saints.
Yes.
So I guess it taps in a little bit into your Cuban side, right? If I remember correctly reading the blog. Tell us a little bit about the storyline and what we can expect.
Sure. So the Book of Lost Saints is narrated by someone who disappeared during the Cuban Revolution and has reemerged as a spirit in 2004 in New Jersey. And she's actually kind of haunting / watching over her nephew, Ramon, who is a DJ and a hospital security guard.
As we do.
What's that?
As one does.
As one does, exactly.
DJ hospital security guard, of course.
Right. So we're watching him from her point of view, and he's kind of an ain't shit dude. Like, he's a really good DJ, but he doesn't have a very strong engine yet, because he's in his 20s and he's just doing his thing. But she needs him to help her access her memories because she can't really. It's all gone for her. So what happens is she's able to get to them through his dreams. So every night when he goes to sleep, or when he takes his naps, because siestas are important, she gives him a little piece of her life through his dreams. And so the story jumps back and forth between revolutionary Cuba and modern-ish day New Jersey. And eventually she goads him to go back to Cuba himself to start doing research and find out what happened to her.
That sounds really, really good.
Wow.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Is it November yet? Because I really want to read the book.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. It's definitely a book of my heart, and it's just very close to home in a lot of ways, and it's just something I care about deeply, and so I'm really excited to see it in the world. It's also very different from anything I've ever published before.
Yeah, I mean, some of the early buzz I've has been talking about how it's that Hispanic or Latinx, magical realism, and I'm not gonna lie, I saw Isabella Allende's name in the same sentence as yours, so
nice.
That's good company to be in, sir.
Yeah, for sure, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. I'm always a little wary of the way that title gets, that sort of genre topic gets used for us, but it is a magical realist book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's at least we own something positive, I guess.
No, we definitely do, and it's real. Like that is from us, and we did that, and I think we should own it. Not own it in the sense of exclusively, but take ownership of the fact that we had a major part in making that tradition in the world, literary tradition, and that's really cool. So, I'm proud to be in that tradition. I was raised in that tradition. My mom is a big literature nerd. And a politics nerd, and so I read Borges and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and everybody as I was coming up, so that was always a big influence.
From what I've been reading, it's pretty evident to some people out there who've had a chance to kind of touch upon it. So
great to hear.
So Daniel, thank you so much for being on Pero Let Me Tell You, and much success to you in all your endeavors. I mean, it was really, really awesome. Thank you.
Can't wait for November, man.
All right, take care, you guys. I'll talk to you again, I'm sure.
All right, cuídate. Bye.
Be well.
And we're back. Everybody feel a little more awakened, a little more woke?
Yeah. I'm ready. Well, I am socially conscious, so. But you know what, though?
I'm selectively socially conscious.
But you know what, though? What I really like about people like him, and even you and I and him could so easily pass.
Yeah.
We could.
Well, you specifically.
We could so easily pass, but we choose not to.
We wear it on our sleeves.
Yeah, because it's like, no.
That's just not who I am.
No, mijito, no.
Nada que ver.
No.
Olvídate tú. We walked too many blocks at Calle Ocho to try to be...
Calle Ocho. Oh my God. Well, to our listeners who are in Miami,
what
we
Calle
didn't
Ocho
talk
is.
about this in the beginning, but we were at Calle Ocho this week. And for those of you who don't know Calle Ocho, so Calle Ocho is, at one point, it was like the country's biggest block party. Right. I don't know if it still is.
It's like a street fair.
And originally in the 60s, it started off as a Cuban street fair to kind of like...
Similar to like the San Gennaro Festival in New York, I would say.
Okay. Where like Cubans that were exiled would get together to kind of like celebrate their culture. Mm-hmm. In years, it diversified to like other Hispanics. Mm-hmm. So now it's kind of like a Latin festival. But... for us here in Miami, we kind of know that in the last, maybe, 10, 15, 20 years, Calle Ocho has gone really downhill. Not in terms of popularity. Popularity. I mean, it's still as popular as ever, and there's still, like, thousands and thousands of people that go.
Around many people.
The people that go there, I don't really know where they live in the city because I never see them. Like, I never see them in the mall or like at Publix.
Son interesante.
It's like creature features. It's like, pero like, oh my God! It's like, look at what you're wearing. Oh my God! Look at how you're. es metralla, as my mom would say.
I choose to go with son interesante, pero...
But nonetheless, we thank Telemundo for having us.
Yes.
We were at their VIP section, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time. It was a great event that Telemundo put on, and also iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio as well.
We were at their VIP section as well, and we had a great time, and they had a wonderful, wonderful setup. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the way that you see it, the Telemundo VIP section was at one end of Calle Ocho, and the iHeartRadio was literally at the end. Like, it ended.
Polar opposites.
And we walked the entire thing. And during the entire thing, I was like, pero what is... And it's not like you and I haven't been in, circumstances
right.
people out there, you know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, this was certainly interesting. So those of you who've wondered if Calle Ocho has cleaned up their act, no, it's more ratchet than ever. So welcome to Miami.
Yeah. And we embrace it full-heartedly.
Yep. And after walking so much in Calle Ocho, I'm thirsty.
Yeah, well, we were exhausted afterwards, so that makes total sense.
Exhausted and thirsty. So, Who do you have as your last Coke?
My last Coke is a self-serving kind of personal last Coke. So
okay,
do you want to go first?
No, tell me yours.
All right. So obviously, you and I have this podcast, and we're up and down everywhere together. But sometimes circumstances are what they are, and so we have to divvy up and divide and conquer. Now, whenever that happens, strong arm is a hard word for it, but I always drag along my boyfriend Jose to all these events.
Are you giving Jose the last Coke?
I am giving Jose the last Coke.
Yay!
Yeah, I am giving Jose the last Coke because you know what? This isn't his project. This is
not
ours.
his shtick.
It's not his shtick, but he's very supportive, and whenever you can't make it to something, he's right there with the camera, just humoring me and helping and taking pictures and videos and all that, to the point where he has named himself our director of PR operations.
Oh well, yeah, it was about time we had one.
It's perfect because we didn't have to pay him, so it works. So yes, I want to give my last soda to my boyfriend for being just being supportive.
Are we giving him a regular Coke or a Diet Coke or a Zero Coke or?
I'm going to divert a little bit and I'm going to give him un irombed.
Okay. Yes. Okay. A soft drink nonetheless. So Jose gets our last Coke of the desert.
Yes.
So my last Coke of the desert is really weird. I'm just going to go with it because I saw it yesterday and I hadn't seen it in like a year. And
George Stephanopoulos.
No, and I fall apart every time I watch this movie. Like literally fall apart. It's 500 Days of Fucking Summer. It's like that movie. It's like
a great movie.
It's like if you get a knife and you stab me over and over and over, y después me echas alcohol.
Coño.
And you know what?
And yeah, you keep coming back to it.
I can't stop watching that movie. I love it. Listeners, have you watched 500 Days of Summer? And tú sabes qué? Don't give me that bullshit nonsense argument that people make. Oh, but she told him.
But she did.
No, she did.
Wait, spoiler.
I don't care. That movie's 10 years old. If you haven't seen it by now, you know what? You deserve to get spoiled. You know what? No. Because yes, she does tell him,
right,
okay,
she's very upfront.
I see, but she knows how he feels about her. He knows that he loves her. That is the love of his life. But when they go to Millie's wedding, she gets all up and personal with him. She falls asleep in his arms. She puts her head on his shoulder, and they have a beautiful date at Millie's wedding. And there he is in the train with that look that he's like, oh, my girl, I got my love back, I got my girl back. And no, only to then next week invite him to a party where it's reality versus expectation, and Darian loses a shit. And it's like
that's the director's cut.
I watched that part of reality versus expectations, and I'm like, I'm turning into a woman. I'm turning into a chick.
I would say I love that movie on its own, but what I love about that movie is I love movies and programs and things that only focus on like maybe 2 or 3 characters, where you don't have a whole cast, because it either you believe in these people or you don't, because there's nothing else there to kind of distract you. So and they do that so fantastically.
And what she tells him at the end, what I was never sure of with you. It's like if I didn't like Zooey Deschanel so much, and Jess, it's like I would freaking punch her in the face.
Like, no, don't she's adorkable. Don't punch her in the face.
That movie is so good. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah. Yeah, I know somebody who watched that movie who thought it was stupid, underrated, and a waste of time. But anyway, I hope everybody...
Enough talk about Wilford Brimley.
I hope everybody enjoyed episode 54 with our special new announcer.
Yes, our new announcer. We pay him in cookies. In mini Chips Ahoy.
But as always, we hope you listened, laughed, and learned. And remember to grab your pastelito, your croqueta, and your jupiña.
Yep. And don't forget to listen to our friends, because we have not been mentioning the Geek Pro Network in the last couple episodes. We've been
I was telling you, you need to put a little post-it note.
I know the way that
they do
the
for us.
Do.
That they have the courtesy of doing for us. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Geek Pro Network, you gotta listen to our Primas and Mamas and Merlot. Also, Mount Geekmore, Woobro, Shiver, Mr. Multiverse. I know they have a couple of newer guys on there who I don't recall off the top of my head because I don't have the paper, like you said. Mm-hmm. But please give our podcast network.
And I have to tell you that in the Geek Pro Network that we're part of, there really is something for everyone.
Yeah, seriously. If you don't find what you're looking for, you're like Bono.
Yeah. Damn it, Bono.
He still hasn't found what he's looking for.
Yeah, but that's part of the process of you too. Anyway, everybody, have a great week. See you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.